The plate broke at 6:15 on a Wednesday evening. Nell Graves heard it from the kitchen. The specific sound of stoneware hitting a flagstone floor, which is not the sound of something dropped, but the sound of something thrown, because a dropped plate hits once and a thrown plate hits and then scatters. And the scattering is the part that tells you the direction it came from and the force behind it. She did not flinch. She had stopped flinching months ago. Not on a particular night, but gradually, the way a body learns to stop bracing for a sound it already knows is coming. The energy spent on flinching was better spent on listening. Listening told her where he was. Listening told her whether the silence that followed the break was the short silence, the one that meant he was done, or the long silence, the one that meant he was deciding. This was the short silence. She waited until the footsteps moved upstairs. Then she went to the front room with the dustpan and the cloth, and she knelt on the flagstones and she picked up the pieces of the plate her mother had painted in 1831, and she placed them in her apron and she carried them to the kitchen table where the hide glue was warming in a jar beside the stove. 4 pieces. A clean break along the rim where the glaze was thinnest. 2 fractures through the body, one of them following the painted line of the blue kingfisher her mother had placed there 15 years ago with a brush made from 3 hairs of a badger, and the steady hand of a woman who understood that the beauty of a plate is in the painting, but the life of a plate is in the repair. Nell set the pieces on the table. She examined the edges, she mixed the kaolin paste, chalk powder and hide glue, thinned with water to the consistency of cream, and she began fitting the plate back together, holding each piece in place for 60 seconds while the glue set, turning the plate in her hands with the patient precision of a woman who has done this before and who will, she understood, do it again. She had mended this plate twice. The first time in September, the break had been simpler. 2 pieces, a clean split through the center. She had mended it so well that even she could not find the join without running her fingernail along the underside. The second time tonight was harder. 4 pieces meant 3 joins, and 3 joins meant 3 chances for the alignment to shift before the glue set. And a shifted alignment meant a plate that looked repaired but was not sound. She could not afford unsound repairs. An unsound repair was visible. A visible repair was a question. A question was a conversation she could not have. Thomas Graves came downstairs at 7. He stood in the kitchen doorway in his shirt sleeves with his collar open and his hair pushed back from his forehead, and the stillness of a man who has been upstairs for 45 minutes doing whatever it is that men like Thomas Graves do in the 45 minutes after they break a plate, which is to say, deciding how much of what just happened they are willing to acknowledge. I dropped the plate. I know, I've mended it. The 4 pieces fitted so precisely that the blue kingfisher was whole again, the painted line unbroken, the surface smooth. Good. He sat at the table. He ate the supper she had prepared. He did not look at the plate again. He did not look at her hands, which were steady because she had trained them to be steady, and which had, beneath the steadiness, a bruise on the left wrist that was 4 days old and turning from purple to yellow in the specific pattern of a hand that had closed around a wrist and held it, and which she kept below the edge of the table while he ate. He went to bed at 9. Nell washed the plate. She set it back on the shelf. She put the hide glue away. She checked the bruise, 4 days old, fading, it would be gone by Saturday. And on Saturday she would go to the village market and Mrs. Braithwaite would look at her hands the way Mrs. Braithwaite always looked at her hands, and Nell would keep them in her pockets or wrapped in her shawl or occupied with a basket, and Mrs. Braithwaite would see what she always saw, which was everything. Nell Graves was 31 years old, the daughter of a potter from Winchcombe who had died when Nell was 12, and the daughter of a woman named Joan who had not been a potter at all but who had understood porcelain repair the way some people understand music. From the inside, by feel, by the particular sound a cracked plate makes when you tap it with your fingernail, which is different from the sound an uncracked plate makes, and which tells you, if you are listening, exactly where the damage is and how deep it goes. Joan had run a repair business from the kitchen of the cottage in Winchcombe. Women brought her their broken things: plates, cups, a teapot with a hairline crack that leaked, a serving dish that had split along a fault in the glaze. Joan fixed them. She fixed them so well that the repaired pieces were often stronger than the originals, because the glue and the paste and the clamp held the pieces together at the molecular level in a way that the original firing had not. She had taught Nell everything. The identification of clays, earthenware, stoneware, porcelain, bone china, by weight, by ring, by the way the light passed through them when you held them to the window. The preparation of glues, hide glue for earthenware, fish glue for porcelain, a mixture of egg white and lime for fine china that required an invisible join. The use of kaolin paste to fill losses where a chip or a fragment had broken away. The steady hand, the 60-second hold, the patience. Joan had died in the winter of 1837. 3 others in the village had died of the same fever that winter, and no one discussed what it said about the water because the water was the only water they had. Nell had been 22. She had taken over the repair business. She had run it from the kitchen for 5 months until it became clear that the women of Winchcombe had brought their broken things to Joan and would not bring them to Joan's daughter, because the daughter was 22 and unmarried, and the village had opinions about unmarried women who worked from their kitchens. She had married Thomas Graves in the autumn of that year. Thomas was a tenant farmer on the Ashby estate, 4 miles from Winchcombe. He was 32, broad, quiet in the way that some quiet men are quiet. Not from peace, but from pressure. The pressure of a man holding something in that requires effort to hold. Nell had not known this. She had known that he had land and a house, and that he did not drink, and that he looked at her, when he looked at her, with an attention that she mistook for interest, and which was, she understood now, assessment. He had been measuring what she would tolerate. He had been doing this from the first conversation, and she had not seen it because she had not known to look for it, because no one had told her that a certain kind of quietness in a man is not peace, but preparation. The first plate broke 3 months after the wedding. That is not quite right. The holding came first, the standing too close, the wrist. The plates came later, years later, when the holding was no longer enough for whatever it was that Thomas needed the breaking to do. The dishes started in the winter of 1843, and by the spring of 1844, Mrs. Braithwaite had noticed. The Duke of Ashby's carriage stopped at the Cross Keys Inn in Winchcombe on a Thursday afternoon in November, because the axle was making a sound the driver did not like, and because the Cross Keys was the nearest place with a yard and a wheelwright. William Courtenay had been travelling from his estate in Wiltshire to a property he owned near Tewkesbury. He did not enjoy travel. He endured it as he endured most things now, with the composed patience of a man who has lost the thing that would have made the endurance unnecessary, and who has not yet found a replacement for it. His sister Catherine had been married to a man like Thomas Graves. He did not know Thomas Graves. He did not know Nell Graves. He did not know anything about Winchcombe except that it had a wheelwright and an inn and a market square, where on this Thursday afternoon the village was conducting its weekly business with the energy of a place that has not yet been reached by the railway and does not yet wish to be. Catherine had died in the spring of 1842. She had been 26. She had been married for 3 years to a landowner in Herefordshire named Pelham, who was, by every account the county offered, a respectable man. Well-mannered, well-dressed, attentive at church, a competent farmer. The county had no complaints about Pelham. The county had noticed nothing. William had noticed things. Small things. The kind that are too small to mention and too consistent to ignore. Catherine's letters had grown shorter over the 3 years. Her handwriting, which had always been large and confident, became smaller and more careful. She stopped visiting. She stopped inviting. When William came to her house, which was twice in the 2nd year and once in the 3rd, she was present in the room, but not in the conversation. She was watching Pelham the way a person watches weather, reading him for what was coming. He had asked her once, in the garden, on the last visit, "Catherine, are you well?" She had smiled. The smile was the worst part. It was the smile of a woman who has rehearsed the answer to that question, and who delivers it so smoothly that the person asking believes it. Because believing it is easier than not believing it, and because not believing it requires doing something, and doing something requires knowing what to do, and William had not known what to do. "I am perfectly well," she had said. 4 months later, she was dead. The physician wrote pleurisy on the certificate. The bruising on her arms was noted in his private record, but not in the public one, because the bruising was not, in the physician's professional judgment, the cause of death, and because Pelham was a man of standing and the physician was a man of caution. And the word that connected the bruising to the pleurisy was a word that no one in the county was willing to write down. William had read the private record. He had obtained it from the physician's widow 2 years later after the physician himself had died, and he had read it standing in her parlour in Herefordshire with his hands very still at his sides, and the particular expression of a man who is reading a document that confirms something he already knew, and that the confirmation does not make better. Catherine's arms, Catherine's ribs, a fracture in the left wrist that had healed at an angle, a pattern of injuries that the physician had recorded with clinical precision and had not reported to anyone. William had done nothing with this record. Pelham had died by then, a fall from a horse, the county said, though the horse was sound. There was no one left to hold accountable. There was only a document in a dead physician's hand, and a sister in a churchyard, and a question that William carried the way other men carried debt, quietly at all times with no expectation of resolution. The question was, how did I sit in her garden and believe the smile? It was not the inn's kitchen, it was the cottage next door, the Graves cottage, which shared a wall with the Cross Keys, and which was, on this Thursday afternoon, close enough that the sound carried through the stone. William heard it. He heard the break. Stoneware on flagstone, the scatter pattern of something thrown, and then the silence. And then, through the wall, a woman's voice. "It was my fault. I wasn't holding it properly." The voice was calm, practiced. The voice of a woman who has said this sentence before and who has refined the delivery until it sounds, to anyone listening, like a simple statement of domestic clumsiness. William set down his glass. He sat very still in the front room of the Cross Keys and listened to what followed the sentence. And he thought about Catherine's garden and Catherine's smile and the 3 words, "I am perfectly well," that he had believed because believing was easier. He did not go next door. He did not knock on the cottage wall. He sat in the front room and waited for the axle to be repaired. And while he waited, he asked the innkeeper a question. "The cottage next door. Who lives there?" "Thomas Graves and his wife. Tenant farmer on the Ashby estate." The innkeeper wiped a glass. "Good man, quiet." "His wife?" "Nell, she was Joan's girl. Joan, who did the china, the repair work before she died." "Does she still do repairs?" "Nell? No. Not since she married. Thomas doesn't like her working. Says there's no need, with the farm." William looked at the wall between the inn and the cottage. He looked at it the way he had learned to look at walls since Catherine. Not as structures, but as the things that separate what is visible from what is not. "Quiet man." "Very quiet." The innkeeper set down the glass. "Keeps to himself. Good farmer." Now, before the Duke leaves this inn, I want to stop for a moment, because I want to speak to anyone listening tonight who has lived on the other side of a wall like this one, who has heard the sound and known what it was and said nothing, because saying something required knowing what to say, and knowing what to say required knowing what to do, and knowing what to do required a world that had a word for what was happening. The world did not have a word for it in 1846. In some places, it still does not. If you have been the person on either side of that wall, this story was written to find you. This is Duke of Hearts Romance. Subscribe, and every week I will bring you another one. Now, back to Winchcombe. The Duke has paid for his drink. He is walking into the market square. William paid for his drink. He walked into the market square. He found what he was looking for at the 3rd stall, a woman in her 60s selling preserves and eggs beside a sign that read Mrs. Braithwaite, Vicarage. He bought a jar of damson preserve. He asked a question. I heard a dish break next door to the inn. Her hands stopped moving over the eggs. She looked at him with the attention of a woman who has been waiting for someone to ask this question and who has not yet decided whether the person asking is the right person to hear the answer. Dishes break, she said. They do. I am asking whether this one was dropped. Mrs. Braithwaite looked at him for a long time. Her eyes moved from his coat to his boots to his face, the composed expression that was not composure, but control. The control of a man holding something down. Who are you? She said. William Courtney. I own the Ashby estate. Thomas Graves is my tenant. Mrs. Braithwaite wrapped the damson preserve in brown paper. She wrapped it the way she wrapped everything, firmly, with both hands, with the knowledge that what she was about to say could not be unwrapped once it was said. The dishes break when he is angry, she said. He's angry when the crop is poor, when the rain is wrong, when the market price drops, when the bread is cold, when the fire is low. He's angry, Your Grace, approximately once a week, and the dishes break approximately once a week. And Nell mends them approximately once a week, and the cycle has continued for 3 years. The dishes is what she says. The dishes is not what I see. What do you see? I see a woman at the Saturday market who keeps her hands in her pockets. I see a woman who wore long sleeves through July. I see a woman who no longer brings her china work to the village because her husband has told her there is no need, and who has not been to church since Easter because the last time she came to church, Your Grace, she had a mark on her cheek that she said was the cupboard door, and the cupboard door in that cottage opens the wrong way for the mark to have been made by it. She set the wrapped preserve on the stool. I have written to the magistrate twice. The magistrate has not replied. I have spoken to the vicar. The vicar has spoken to Thomas Graves, who told the vicar that his wife is clumsy and that clumsiness is not a matter for the church. I have done, Mrs. Braithwaite said, what I can do from a market stall. If you own the land he farms, you can do what I cannot. William took the preserve. He did not go back to the inn. He walked to the cottage next door, and he knocked on the door. Nell opened the door. She had flour on her apron and her hair pinned back, and the blue kingfisher plate on the shelf behind her, mended, whole, the cracks invisible. The man at the door was not from the village. She registered the coat, the boots, the quality, the fact that he was not from the village. Can I help you? She said. My name is William Courtney. I own the estate that leases the land your husband farms. Nell's expression did not change. It did not change because she had trained it not to change. The same way she had trained her hands not to flinch, and her voice not to waver, and her body not to give away anything that could be used as a question. Thomas is not here, she said. I know. I heard him leave through the back door 10 minutes ago. She said nothing. May I come in? I would prefer you didn't. William looked at the kitchen behind her. His eyes went to the shelf with the blue kingfisher plate, then to her hands, which were at her sides, and he could see, because he had spent 4 years training himself to see it, the edge of a bruise on her left wrist where the sleeve of her dress did not quite cover it. Mrs. Graves, he said, I am not here about the farm. Then why are you here? Because I heard a dish break through the wall of the inn, and the sound it made was not the sound of a dish that was dropped. Nell looked at him. She looked at him the way she looked at a cracked plate, examining the fracture, measuring the damage, calculating whether the break could be repaired or whether it had gone too deep. I don't know what you heard. You do. You have been listening to that sound for 3 years. You know exactly what it sounds like, and you know that I know, and you are deciding right now whether I'm someone who will ask the question and then leave, or someone who will ask the question and then do something about the answer. She was very still. I had a sister, he said. Her name was Catherine. She was married to a man who was described by everyone who knew him as quiet, good, respectable, a good farmer. He paused. She died. The physician wrote pleurisy on the certificate. The bruising on her arms was in his private notes. Nell's hand moved to her wrist. She did not mean to do this. It was the involuntary movement of a person whose body has heard something her mind has not yet finished processing. I did not act for Catherine, he said, not because I could not see it, because I chose to believe the answer she gave me. She said she was well. I wanted that to be true more than I wanted to ask what would happen if it was not. I am standing at your door because I have spent 4 years learning the cost of wanting someone else's answer to be enough. She did not invite him in. She did not send him away. Instead, she stood in the doorway of the cottage her husband leased from the estate this man owned. And she weighed 2 things against each other: the safety of staying quiet and the cost of staying quiet, which were the same weight, which was the whole problem. The plate, the one on the shelf, the blue kingfisher. Yes, my mother painted it in 1831. I have mended it twice. I can see that. You can see it. No, I cannot see the repair. That is how I know you have done it more than once. A repair that clean has been practiced. She looked at him. He had said something no one had ever said to her. Not Mrs. Braithwaite, who saw everything but could not name it in technical terms. Not the vicar, who saw nothing, not Thomas, who saw the whole plate and said good and went to bed. This man had looked at the shelf and read the repair the way she read a fracture, from the evidence of skill backward to the frequency of its use. Come in. She made tea. She made it without asking whether he wanted it, because making tea was the thing her hands did when her hands needed something to do. And her hands needed something to do because she was about to say something she had not said to anyone since the first plate broke. William sat at the kitchen table. He sat the way he sat everywhere now, reading it. The kitchen told him what he had expected it to tell him. The cottage was clean, maintained, the food was simple but sufficient. The shelf with the plates told him more. He counted 8 plates on the shelf. 3 of them had been repaired, the kingfisher and 2 others. The repairs could not be seen by the eye, but he could tell, from the way the light caught the glaze at a slightly different angle on the mended sections, that the surface had been rebuilt. 3 plates out of 8. In 3 years. He doesn't hit me, Nell said. She said this plainly without flinching, with the practiced calm of a woman who has been holding a story in place since the wedding and who has decided, not yet to release it, but to set one edge of it on the table and see whether the table can hold it. He holds my wrist. He stands too close. He breaks the dishes, and then the room goes quiet, and I clean up the pieces, and he comes down and says he dropped them. And I say, I know, and I mend them, and we do not discuss what happened, because discussing what happened is the thing that makes it happen again. She poured the tea. I am not beaten. I am not struck. I am held, and I am frightened, and I am living inside a pattern that does not have a name in the law, because the law does not recognize a pattern. The law recognizes a blow, a bruise, a broken bone. The law does not recognize the sound a plate makes when it hits a flagstone floor, or the 45 minutes of silence afterward, or the sentence he says when he comes downstairs, which is always the same sentence, which is, I dropped the plate. William did not speak. He did not need to. He was listening the way Nell listened, for the difference between what was said and what was meant. Mrs. Braithwaite knows, Nell said. She has known since the first year. She wrote to the magistrate. The magistrate did not reply. I know, she told me. Then you know what she knows, and you know what the magistrate knows, which is that a man who holds his wife's wrist and breaks the dishes and says he dropped them is not, in the eyes of the law, a man who has done anything. Her tea was getting cold. I cannot leave. I have no money. The repair business was mine, but the marriage made it his, and he has not let me work since the first year. I cannot go to my mother because my mother is dead. I cannot go to the vicar because the vicar has spoken to Thomas, and Thomas has explained that I am clumsy. I cannot go to the magistrate because the magistrate does not believe that the dishes were thrown. She paused. I mend the plates because they are the only things in this house I can fix. Now I want to tell you something true about the world Nell was living in. In 1846, a married woman in England could not own property. Under the law of coverture, everything she had, her money, her possessions, her earnings, her inheritance, became her husband's upon marriage. Nell's repair business, which had been her mother's business and which Nell had run for 5 months before her marriage, ceased to be hers the moment she married Thomas Graves. She could not seek a divorce. Divorce in 1846 required an Act of Parliament, expensive, public, and available almost exclusively to men. A woman could petition the ecclesiastical courts for a separation, but only on grounds of life-threatening cruelty combined with adultery. Cruelty alone was not enough. A husband who broke the dishes and held his wife's wrist and stood too close and filled the house with silence was not, in the eyes of the law, cruel. He was quiet. The Matrimonial Causes Act, which would create the first secular divorce courts and allow women to petition on grounds of cruelty alone, would not be passed for another 11 years. Nell Graves was trapped not by a man, but by a system. A legal architecture that treated a wife as an extension of her husband, rather than a person in her own right. The dishes she mended were legally his dishes. The hands she mended them with were under coverture, legally his hands. If you have lived inside a system that was designed to protect you and that instead protected the person you needed protection from, this story was written for you. The Duke of Ashby returned to Winchcombe 3 days later. He did not go to the cottage, he went to Mrs. Braithwaite at the vicarage and he sat in her kitchen, a kitchen very different from Nell's, warm and cluttered and full of preserves and the organized disorder of a woman who keeps the record of an entire village. And he asked to see what she had. Mrs. Braithwaite produced a notebook. The notebook was not dramatic. It was a small lined book of the kind used for household accounts, and it contained, in Mrs. Braithwaite's careful handwriting, years of observations. March 1844. Long sleeves in warm weather. Left wrist. June 1844. Did not come to church. Sent word she was unwell. September 1844. Mark on right cheek. Said the cupboard door. January 1845. Limping. Said the step. April 1845. Did not attend the Easter service. Thomas attended alone. The entries continued for 3 years, 37 entries. Each one noted the date, the observation, and the explanation Nell had offered. The explanations were all domestic. The cupboard, the step, the gate, the garden wall. The pattern was in the frequency, not in any single entry. William read the notebook. He read it the way he had read the physician's private record from Herefordshire, with his hands very still and the particular expression of a man who is reading something that confirms what he already knew, and who knows this time that he is going to do something with it. "This is not enough for the magistrate," he said. "I know," Mrs. Braithwaite said. "It is enough for God, but God has not written back either. What does she need? She needs to not be in that house. She needs her own income. She needs a place where the plates do not break." William Courtenay looked at Mrs. Braithwaite's kitchen, the preserves, the eggs, the notebook, the woman who had kept the record for 3 years because no one else was keeping it, and he thought about his sister and the physician's private notes and the public certificate that said pleurisy and the private truth that said something else. "I own the estate," he said. "The cottage is part of the tenant lease. The lease is in Thomas Graves's name." "Yes." "If the lease is not renewed, the cottage is vacated. If the cottage is vacated, she is no longer in the house." "And where does she go?" "I have a property in Tewkesbury, a townhouse with a workshop. It has been empty for 2 years." Mrs. Braithwaite looked at him. "You would give the woman a house?" "I would offer the woman a workshop, a place to repair china. The house is incidental." He paused. "Her mother ran a repair business. She ran it for 5 months before the marriage. The skill is hers. The business was taken by the marriage. I am proposing to return it. By giving her a workshop. By returning a workshop. She already has the hands." Thomas Graves received notice that his lease would not be renewed on the 1st of December. The notice came from the estate solicitor in Cheltenham, and it cited failure to maintain drainage on the lower field, which was accurate, because Thomas Graves had not maintained the drainage on the lower field for 2 years, and because the lower field had flooded twice, and because the estate had a legal right to terminate a lease for failure of maintenance, and because the Duke of Ashby had instructed his solicitor to find a legally sound reason to terminate the lease, and the drainage was the legally sound reason. Thomas Graves received this notice at the kitchen table. He read it without speaking. He set it down. The shelf held 8 plates, 3 repaired. He looked at Nell, who was standing by the stove with her hands in her apron, and the kitchen went still with the long quiet, the one that meant he was deciding. The plate did not break. What broke was the pattern. Thomas Graves stood up from the table, put on his coat, and walked out of the cottage. He walked to the cross keys. He drank for the first time since Nell had known him. 3 pints of ale, purchased with money from the jar on the kitchen shelf. And he told the innkeeper that the estate had ruined him, and the innkeeper listened and poured and said nothing, because the innkeeper had heard a dish break through the wall 3 weeks ago and had seen a duke sit very still in the front room afterward. And the innkeeper understood, in the way that innkeepers understand things, that the 2 events were not unrelated. Nell stood in the kitchen after Thomas left. She stood very still for a long time. She was listening, not for the sound of breaking, but for the absence of it. The absence was louder than the sound had ever been. It filled the kitchen the way silence fills a room when the thing that was making noise stops, and the stopping is not peace, but the space where peace might eventually go. She picked up the lease notice. She read it. She read it twice, once for the words and once for what the words meant, which was that the cottage would be vacated by the 1st of January, and that she would have nowhere to go, and that she was, for the first time since the wedding, in danger of something different from what she had been in danger of before. She put on her shawl. She walked to the vicarage. Mrs. Braithwaite opened the door. She looked at Nell. She looked at Nell's hands, which were not in her pockets. "Come in," she said. What followed was not rescue. Nell was clear about this later, when she described it, to Mrs. Braithwaite, to the solicitor, to the magistrate, who finally, 2 months after the lease termination, agreed to hear an account of the dishes and the wrist and the silence and the pattern that the law did not have a name for. "He did not save me," she said. "He opened a door. I walked through it." The Tewkesbury workshop was on a quiet street behind the Abbey. It had a front room with a counter and shelves and good light from a north-facing window, and a back room with a workbench and a stove for warming glue and a set of tools that the previous tenant, a clockmaker who had retired to Bath, had left behind, and which were not the right tools for porcelain but which were close enough. And Nell had always been good at working with what was close enough. She arrived on a Tuesday in January with a canvas bag that held her clothes, her mother's brushes, 3 jars of hide glue she had made herself, a pot of kaolin powder, and the blue kingfisher plate. The plate came with her. She had taken it because it was not Thomas's plate. It was her mother's plate, painted by her mother's hand, mended by her own. And because the law of coverture could claim her earnings and her tools and the chair she sat in, but it could not claim a plate that had been broken and repaired and broken and repaired. And that was held together now by nothing except the work she had put into it. The plate went on the shelf in the front room. The stove in the back room came next, then the glue. She arranged the clockmaker's tools on the bench, not the right tools, but close, and she sat at the workbench in the quiet and waited. The quiet was different here. Not the short kind or the long kind. Not the kind that meant he was deciding. This was the quiet of an empty workshop on a Tuesday morning in January, and it was, Nell understood, the first quiet she had known since the wedding that did not require listening. She sat in it for a long time. Then she opened the door. The first client came on Thursday, a woman from the next street carrying a soup tureen with a crack along the base that she had been hiding from her husband for 2 months because the tureen had been a wedding gift from his mother, and the crack was, in the woman's accounting, a failure she could not afford to explain. "Can you make it invisible?" Nell turned the tureen in her hands. She felt the crack, a clean fracture along the base following the fault in the glaze. The glaze was poor, too thin at the base where the potter had rushed the dipping, and the crack had found the weakness the way cracks always do. "Yes," she said. She mended the tureen in 40 minutes. The woman turned it over 3 times, looking for the repair. She could not find it. "How?" she said. "The crack follows the glaze fault," Nell said. "If you fill the fault and the crack at the same time, the surface reads as original. The repair is in the glaze, not on it." The woman left with her tureen. She told the woman at the bakery. The woman at the bakery brought a chipped serving plate on Friday. The woman at the draper's brought a cracked vase on Saturday. By the end of the second week, Nell had 7 commissions and a waiting list. She opened the business formally in February. She opened it under her own name, Nell Graves, China Repair, because the Duke of Ashby's solicitor had found a mechanism through which the workshop lease was held in trust rather than in Nell's name, which meant Thomas could not claim it, and because the law was a wall, and walls have doors if you know where to look. Mrs. Braithwaite visited in March. She brought preserves. She brought eggs. She brought the notebook, the 3 years of observations, and she set it on the workbench beside a teapot with a hairline crack that a woman from Tewkesbury had brought in that morning. "You won't need this anymore," she said, meaning the notebook. "Keep it. Someone might." Mrs. Braithwaite kept it. The Duke of Ashby came to the workshop in April. He came because the trust arrangement required a quarterly review, which was the legal reason, and he came because he had not seen her since the morning at the cottage door when he had asked to come in and she had said she would prefer he didn't, which was the other reason. She was at the workbench. She was mending a gravy boat, a piece of Staffordshire pottery from the 1820s, with a crack along the handle that would not have been visible to anyone who was not searching for it. She was searching. She was always searching. The quarterly review. The accounts are on the counter. He read the accounts. 12 commissions in 8 weeks. The income was modest, but real. Enough to cover the workshop expenses and the room she rented above a draper's shop and the material she ordered from a supplier in Worcester. The business was sound. It is sound. It is mine. That is the part that matters. The workshop surrounded them. The tools on the bench, the glue warming on the stove, the north-facing window with the good light. The hands that were mending a gravy boat with the precision of a woman who has spent her life making cracks disappear and who is now, for the first time, in a room where nothing needs to be hidden. "Miss Graves." She looked up. "Mrs. I am still married." "I know. I may always be married. The law does not let me stop being married because my husband broke the dishes." "I know." "Then you know that whatever this is, the workshop, the trust, the quarterly review, it is not a courtship. It is a business arrangement." "I know," he said. She looked at him the way she had looked at him at the cottage door, examining the fracture, measuring the depth. "You keep saying, 'I know,'" she said. "What do you know?" "I know that you mend things that other people break. I know that the skill it takes to make a crack invisible is the same skill it takes to hide one on your own body. I know that you said, 'I would prefer you didn't,' when I asked to come in, and that you said it with the politeness of a woman who has learned that politeness is a form of protection, and that it should not have to be." He paused. "And I know that I stood at your door because I failed to stand at my sister's, and that I cannot undo the failure. But I can make certain that the next door I stand at opens to something other than what my sister's opened to." Nell set down the gravy boat. "Your sister?" she said. "Catherine. She died in 1842. "The same." "The same." He was quiet. "Pleurisy on the certificate. Bruising in the physician's private notes." She was still for a moment. "I am sorry for your sister," she said, "and I am sorry for the plates." The business grew. It grew the way things grow when they are tended by someone who understands repair, slowly from the base, with attention to what holds and what does not. By autumn, Nell had 20 regular clients. Women from Tewkesbury and the surrounding villages brought her their broken things. Not just plates and cups, but candlesticks, figurines, a marble clock face with a chip that the owner's wife had been hiding from her husband for 6 years. Nell took them all. She mended them with the patient precision of a woman who understands that the value of a mended thing is not that it is whole again, but that someone thought it was worth mending. Mrs. Braithwaite wrote once a month. Her letters were short, informative, and structured like her preserves, everything necessary, nothing wasted. Thomas had taken a room above the Cross Keys. He was drinking. He was not farming. The lower field had flooded a third time. The new tenant on the Graves land was a younger man with a wife and 2 children who had repaired the drainage in the first week. Thomas had not come looking for Nell. This was the thing she had expected, and the thing she had feared, and the thing that, when it arrived, felt like neither expectation nor fear, but like the absence of a sound she had been listening for. The long quiet after the break, the one that meant he was deciding. He had decided. He had decided to let her go, not out of kindness, but out of the same indifference with which he had held her wrist and broken the dishes, the indifference of a man who has lost the object of his pattern and who will, in time, find another. She did not grieve the marriage. She grieved the plates. William came to the workshop every quarter. The reviews took 15 minutes. He stayed for an hour. He stayed because Nell made tea and because the tea was an invitation she did not extend to anyone else, and because the hour after the review was the hour in which they talked. Not about the accounts or the trust or the legal mechanism, but about the things that the legal mechanism was built to protect. He told her about Catherine. He told her about the garden and the smile and the 3 words, "I am perfectly well," and the 4 years he had spent learning to stop believing them. He told her about the physician's private record and the public certificate and the distance between what was written and what was true, which was the same distance Nell had been living inside for 3 years. She told him about the plates. She told him about the blue kingfisher and the 60-second hold and the way a crack runs through porcelain. Not in a straight line, but along the fault in the glaze, the weakness that was fired into the surface at the moment of its making, the flaw that was invisible until the force found it. "The flaw was not mine," she said. "The force was not mine. The repair was mine." He looked at her. She looked at him. The workshop was quiet in the way that a room is quiet when 2 people have finished saying the difficult things and have arrived, by different routes, at the same understanding. That the repair is not the same thing as the damage, and that the person who does the repair is not defined by the thing that required it. "The repair was yours," he said. "The rest was not." 2 years later, the workshop had a second room. The second room was for teaching. Nell had begun taking students, 2 girls from the village, the daughter of the draper, a widow from Cheltenham who had been mending her own china for years and wanted to learn to do it properly. Nell taught them the way her mother had taught her, by doing it beside them, not by telling them about it. William had built the shelves in the second room. He had built them himself, with the careful carpentry of a man who has more respect for the craft than skill in it, and Nell had looked at the shelves and said, "The joints are loose. They hold. They hold because the wall is holding them. A good shelf holds itself." She had shown him how to cut a housing joint. She had stood beside him at the bench and guided the saw with her hand beside his, and the joint was accurate and the shelf held itself, and he had looked at the shelf and then at the woman and understood that being taught by someone who knows what they are doing is one of the better things a life can contain. From the front room of the workshop, where the north-facing window let in the good light, the sound of a girl named Rose, age 7, explaining to a gravy boat that she was going to mend it and that it should hold still. Rose was not Nell's daughter. Rose was not anyone's daughter in the legal sense. She was the child of the draper's sister, who had died in childbirth, and the draper had taken her in. And Rose had wandered into Nell's workshop one afternoon because the door was open, and because Rose was the kind of child who walked through open doors without consulting anyone about whether the walking was appropriate. Nell had given her a broken saucer and a pot of paste and said, "See if the pieces fit." The pieces fit. Rose had been coming back every Saturday since. William looked at the shelf he had built. The workshop with its 2 rooms and its students and its north-facing light and the sound of a child talking to a gravy boat. And he thought about Catherine's garden and the question he had carried for 4 years. How did I sit there and believe the smile? And he understood that the question had changed. The question was no longer how did I fail to see it? The question was, what do I do now that I can? The answer was in the workshop. In the shelves he had built, and the joints Nell had corrected, and the students she was teaching, and the door he had opened, and the woman who had walked through it. The shelf, Nell said. What about the shelf? It's level. You sound surprised. I am. She almost smiled. Don't let it go to your head. It was the first time she had almost smiled at him. He noted it as he noted everything. Carefully, without pressure, with the understanding that a woman who has spent 3 years training her face not to give anything away does not give things away lightly, and that an almost smile, earned, was worth more than a full one offered for free. Now, I want to tell you something about the women who mended the broken things. The history of ceramics repair in England is the history of women's hands. The factories made the plates. The markets sold them. The men signed the commissions and the invoices and the trade directories. But the repairs, the quiet, invisible, patient work of fitting the pieces back together after the breaking, were done overwhelmingly by women working from kitchens and back rooms and workshops that no trade directory recorded. Nell Graves is fiction. The hands are real. If you have spent your life fixing what someone else broke, if you know what it costs to make the cracks invisible, and if you have decided, finally, that the cracks are not yours to hide, this story was for you. Where did it land? The blue kingfisher, the 60-second hold, Mrs. Braithwaite's notebook, the shelf that holds itself, the almost smile? Drop it in the comments. I read everyone. And if you are new here, welcome. This is Duke of Hearts Romance. We tell stories about the women who mended the broken things. Subscribe. The next one is already waiting. Good night.